My exposure to a variety of people in the United States and also in Turkey who are involved in Hizmet has continued to impress me with the uniformity of their commitment to some central core principles. Conversation about him with the books that I've read of his have impressed me. Gulen universities, but attended state universities. So an indication to me that Yeah, my name is Chris Heavner, and I'm a pastor in the Christian tradition, and specifically in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm a native of North Carolina, but now I serve at Clemson University, which is in South Carolina. I've been serving here as the campus pastor for 21 years, working with the college students, working with the faculty and staff in the university itself. Again, for me, the emphasis on education within Hizmet is the thing that stands out more than anything else. It grows out of a commitment to interfaith dialogue and to intercultural conversation. But it's been those experiences of the Hizmet schools that have been the most meaningful in my life. I had the chance to travel to Turkey and to travel into southern Turkey, pretty close to the Syrian border. And the school that we visited there is the one that I remember the most. We learned from our host that many of the children in that part of Turkey were being caught up directly in the conflict that was going on between the cultures in southern Turkey, northern Syria. And as the students in the school experienced learning math problems and learning writing skills, we could see how much they enjoyed being together with others around them. And so my experience at those schools is the primary reason that I've continued to be excited about Hizmet and staying involved with Hizmet is because I could see what a difference it was making in the lives of those persons. I would also comment on the experience that I've had of the students from Turkey who have come now to the United States to study, and to realize that many of them speak of their own child and youth as one that was disadvantaged in one way or another. The school they were attending was not necessarily a school that was going to be able to adequately prepare them for university studies or for graduate studies, but it was the Hizmet school that made that possible for them. It was sometimes the quality of the teachers at the Hizmet school, but equally as often it was the seriousness with which some of the adults who were connected to the school talked to these young men and women about their future lives. In other words, these graduate students that I've met here in Clemson have shown the importance not simply of a school teaching information, but a school being involved in formation for adulthood, formation for responsible citizenship in the world. And so, again, my experience of Hizmet and the Hizmet schools has been that this is something that they have done very well. Certainly they've done it very well in the lives of the young men and women that I have had the opportunity to meet and to greet. The criticisms of Hizmet and the criticisms of Gulen are things that I've been exposed to. Some have made me aware of these things, thinking that it would immediately change my opinion about Hizmet or about Gulen, and it has not. I am not in a position to make final decisions about Gulen or Hizmet. What I've experienced has left me with a strong conviction that it really is a movement. And in a movement, there's a lack of central control and authority. And so when you do not have a central control or authority, it's very easy for one party or two parties or three parties to be conflicted in what they say about their experience and about what they're trying to do. My exposure to a variety of people in the United States and also in Turkey who are involved in Hizmet has continued to impress me with the uniformity of their commitment to some central core principles. Those central core principles being the value of education, the importance of service, and the essential involvement of one's faith life with one's civic and business life. If there is some conspiracy behind Hizmet and behind Gulen, then those who spoke with me had to be extremely well schooled. Otherwise, I do not believe they could have given the answers that were as uniform in their principles, even though they differed in the particulars of how they were living out Hizmet in their own life. In other words, I have remained convinced that those who are involved in the Hizmet movement understand it to be a movement of which they are a part, a movement which does not have a central authority or a central guiding documents, but a movement of concerned individuals, a movement of committed individuals who are looking to do all that they can in order to promote the common good and in order to reflect Islam's insistence that we be of service and care to those who are our neighbors, particularly those neighbors who are in the greatest need. I have had the opportunity to travel to Turkey twice with Hizmet. Anecdotally, or not anecdotally, but the most influential experiences I think I had on all of those trips, however, were with the Turkish students who traveled with us as we traveled through Turkey. And one story I love to tell. We were in Istanbul. We were having tea, sitting and visiting, and there were a group of young boys, probably 13, 14, maybe 15, 16 years of age. They saw us there. They saw us having tea with our Turkish host, with our Islamic host, and these young boys began to yell. We couldn't tell what they were saying, but of course our host knew what they were saying. As we saw all of this unfold, one of our hosts left our party, began to engage these boys in conversation, and when these boys attempted to flee or to run away, he continued to follow them. It was obvious by his actions that what he was trying to do was to get them to come back and to join us. His wife was with us, and she became a little bit nervous that he followed them as far down the path as he did. When we were all back together, it was reported to us that these young boys had come along and were critical of he and his wife for having tea with a bunch of people from the U.S., a bunch of people who were not Islamic. He began to say to these young boys, if you knew these persons as I know these persons, you would understand why they are our friends and not our enemies. And what he was trying desperately to do was to encourage those young boys to come back and sit with us and have a cup of tea. Very impressive. It was very obvious to us in that exchange that Tuğçe cared very deeply about us as his travel companions, but cared equally deeply about those young boys and the experiences in their lives that perhaps had wounded and hurt them to where they did not find it possible to trust the stranger, to trust persons from the West, to trust persons who were Christians as opposed to Islam. And so that story will forever remain with me as an example of what it means to welcome and to be involved in this enterprise. A second story that I like to tell is of our traveling, again close to the Syrian border. We were a travel group, and we had our own bus that we were traveling with, and somehow, some way along the path, a local police department realized who we were and what we were doing, and also where we were going. And so they asked if we might take on an additional burden. And that burden that they asked us to take on was a young woman who needed transport back to her home. Those of us from the West, from the United States, did not completely understand what was going on until it was all over. But our driver, while he was primarily charged with showing us Turkey and showing us around Turkey, refused to turn his back on this young woman and her small child who needed a ride from where we were to the place that she was lodging some 150 kilometers away. And so again, the care that was shown for this woman in the midst of what was already a pretty full schedule entertaining these Western hosts really impressed me a lot for how these Hizmet participants in Turkey knew that as important as it was to have their guest with them, it was also equally important to take care of the neighbor who was in need at that particular time. One of the first projects that we did with the Turkish students here is a thing that we refer to in English as Noah's pudding. If I pronounce the Turkish correctly, it's ashra. This is the tradition of making this barley and sugar and grain and fruit concoction and then sharing it with their neighbors. We learned of this tradition and learned that once a year the Turkish students here at Clemson would make this Noah's pudding and distribute it on campus. So for the last 3 years, 4 years, we've done this together. The students come here to our Christian church and we get in the kitchen and we cook pots and pots of this stuff. We put it in individual serving cups and then we go on campus the next day in order to hand it out. Most Christians realize that the story of Noah and Noah's Ark is geographically connected to Turkey. We assume that it's in Turkey that the Ark landed. And it's been a great experience for our Christian students to understand how that tradition of Noah continues to live out in Turkish culture and in Islamic culture. More importantly, I think it's given us a chance to cook. Anytime that you can be around the stove, you have a certain sense of family and home, and the opportunity it has to just learn each other's life and each other's life stories is greatly enhanced by that. And then as we go on campus to distribute the food, it's another great experience. An experience not just for the 15 or 20 students that have been together to cook and come together to do the distribution, but also for all of the campus. I think we hand out something like 500 servings of Noah's pudding. And so everyone that receives that receives an expression of goodwill, an expression of hospitality, an expression of Turkish culture and the desire of these Turkish students to do something positive on our campus. We also, of course, give them a flyer, and the flyer talks about the commitment of the Hizmet students here in interfaith conversation and dialogue. The flyer also speaks then, of course, of our Christian organization's desire for the same. And so it's been a great way for Turkish culture to be introduced and shared with folks here in Clemson. The other thing that we've done that's been more, I think, influential in the wider community is the annual sacrifice and meat sharing tradition. Again, I'm very difficult in saying some of these words, but Id al-Hadhar, I think is how it's said. At Id, we've come together for 2 years now, contacted through some of our local social service agencies, families that could greatly benefit from some meat. When the Turkish families made their sacrifice and then brought the meat here, then we went together, Christians and Muslims, and shared it with the folks in our community. The significant part of that is that most of those recipients of the meat at Id were not the families that you would tend to encounter at the university. They were not families who were professors at the school or high-ranking administrators at the school. And so this was a first opportunity for many of those local families to experience one-on-one some of the Turkish, some of the Islamic students that they may know were in town but had never had that much contact with. Again, just a life-changing and altering experience for the students involved in the process, for the families that receive the meat, and I would say particularly for the small children in those families who sometimes were more interested in asking questions than the adults. So when the women would show up with their scarves, the young girls would say, "Why are you wearing that thing?" And it just provided perfect opportunities to step aside from all the difficulty we have in conversation and to have the one-on-one, face-to-face encounter and exchange that we all desire so much. I'm very impressed with what I've experienced of the Hizmet movement, and I'll have to say the most impressive part of it all has been the ways in which persons integrate their professional life with their faith life and their devotion.
Certainly, especially in contemporary times, certainly the Hizmet movement gives people the correct, the true version of Islam.
you.